Alex is a Marine veteran who spent 10 years serving. He was fired from a supervisor training program at the VA Medical Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us. First off, I just want to understand something, because the grounds for termination in your case and so many others is basically a question of whether your continued employment was in the, quote, public interest. What is your reaction to that?
So yeah, that's the exact language that was on the termination notification. It's my reaction at first, it was surprise, disbelief. And I mean, this morning as I packed up my office, it's anger, because it's I was terminated for my performance. I haven't even had a performance review. Nobody consulted any supervisors or even the director of our hospital before making these terminations.
So tell me about your job and why you wanted to work at the VA.
Yeah, so I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps. I loved it. Greatest job I ever had. And I made the decision to transition into the civilian world. And for a little bit, I worked in civilian jobs. I was at a pharmaceutical company for a little bit, and they sent me to a military-friendly employers conference. And I ended up sharing a table with some Veterans Affairs social workers. There's a Marine Corps vet, and he was telling me about the work he does, and like looking at that group of people and the organizations that get back to veterans, I made the decision that is what I want to do. I want to continue serving my country, and I thought there'd be no better way than helping veterans, my family, the people that gave me so much. I'd like to give back, and my role there is an administrative officer for our primary care department of the hospital. So it's a lot of behind the scenes stuff. It's kind of eliminating the red tape and friction that just comes into healthcare, as far as like scheduling doctors, the patients, making sure wait times are short, scheduling vacation, pay, ordering equipment, all these things that we try and take the administrative burden off of the doctors and the nurses and the care providers to get veterans treated, as quickly and effectively as possible.
Yeah. So you have the VA Secretary Doug Collins saying that these firings will not negatively impact VA healthcare. What's your reaction to that?
He didn't ask my supervisor that. He didn't give me time to do a proper transition of duties to people that would be covering down on what I was supposed to. We didn't get to pass my access to different, networks and databases. I had no time to make sure that I left the job with a proper transition. So there wasn't a gap in treatment or service. I had to come in after I was fired to make sure that my team had all of the information until they cut my access to my government email and phone at 5 p.m. Friday evening.
Do you get, I think a lot of people don't realize that almost a third of the federal workforce is veterans. Do you get the impression as you hear just people, Americans talking about federal workers, politicians talking about federal workers, that there's an understanding of who federal workers are?
Yeah, I think it's something that's kind of, it's grown as far as like the evil bureaucracy. The words that are being thrown around are, parasitic, lazy, unproductive. And like we're hearing these words, but again, and I had limited experience with the VA before I worked there. And then seeing the men and women that are dedicating their lives, they're not making the most money doing this. They're doing it for, different reasons. Especially our doctors, our administrators, these highly trained, highly skilled people had made this decision to serve. Like, these are the parasites. These are the lazy, unproductive, employees that you're hearing, politicians and other media outlets say. There's combat veterans. There's survivors, whose family members passed away, in service to this country. It's your neighbors. These are not the evil bureaucrats you think that are just gumming up the system and living off the system. We want to work hard. We want to help people. And it's for, it's across the board for all federal agencies. But it's easy to paint them as an enemy in this situation.
And you see people singing 1960s style, when you see Kamala Harris on Broadway, inspiring people, as you know she's capable of. What does that tell you about the trajectory that everybody's on?
I don't know. They're trying to find answers, man. Listen, for people sitting where we're sitting, I was very supportive of Bobby Kennedy. That led me to Donald Trump. And I am so grateful. I am so grateful that the election went the way that it did. And specifically because people like Bobby and Tulsi Gabbard are now in there and confirmed and can do the work. And listen, DOGE is complicated, right? Like, there are a lot of people that are very afraid right now because there are truly good working people that work for the government that are getting lost in the cracks. And we have got to do something about that. Please, Elon and all of your team and whatever needs to happen, please don't let everybody fall through the cracks as we are doing what is necessary, which is to get in there and like cut a cancer out, man. You know, sometimes they go in for cancer surgeries, doctors, and you lose some good, healthy tissue along in that. They don't want to do that, but it's a part of like extracting that darkness out of there. And right now, that's what's happening. But there are good people that voted for Donald Trump who are losing their job. And we got to make sure that we don't leave those folks behind.
Well said. Tell me about The Unbreakable Boy. Why are you so behind this film?
It's just a beautiful film, man. I mean, there's nothing big and glitzy and, glamoury about it. It's a true.
This weekend, USA Today reports that 20 people in the Office of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices at the FDA were just fired. Perhaps coincidentally, that is the unit at the FDA that was investigating Elon Musk's company, the company that he owns that wants to graft computer chips onto people's brains. People doing that oversight work for Elon Musk's company are just fired at the FDA. And on that point, on that story, here's the thing we're seeing over and over again now. Quote, the dismissal letters sent to FDA reviewers cited performance reasons, even though these employees had no issues on their prior performance and had received top-notch rankings several weeks ago, according to two sources familiar with the matter. So they're being told they're being fired for performance reasons, but there's nothing in any of their performance reviews that would support that. In fact, quite the contrary. We're seeing that at FDA where they fired people who were in charge of regulating the computer chips Elon Musk wants to graft into your brain. We're also seeing similar reports in the firings of the National Nuclear Security Administration folks. People being told they're being fired for poor performance, even though there's nothing in their performance review history that would suggest any poor performance. Same thing is happening among people being fired at USDA and at the Department of Education and at the U.S. Forest Service and at the VA and at the Small Business Administration and at the Department of Transportation. NBC News reviewed documentation there that shows people being fired supposedly for performance reasons had just received, quote, exceptional performance reviews. And so I don't know if the pattern here seems as obvious to everybody as it does to me, but it seems to me like it's a pattern, right? There was no $50 million in condoms for Gaza that Hamas used to make their bombs. There are no 150-year-old Americans getting Social Security checks. The Reuters news agency did not get a government contract to deceive the public. The government does not fund the New York Times or Politico to produce positive stories about Democrats. The U.S. government does not pay for celebrity junkets to Ukraine. That was literally Russian propaganda. And the U.S. government is not right now trying to fire hundreds of thousands of people who work in the U.S. government because they've all had bad performance reviews. This isn't happening. One way to tell when somebody doesn't actually have a good reason for what they're doing is when every reason they give you for that thing is very obviously made up. None of the things they're saying about why they need to do these mass, and in many cases, apparently illegal firings, holds up once you put it up to the light. But they're going ahead. They're now firing the people who work at the CDC on bird flu, as bird flu becomes a massive multi-state epidemic affecting tens of millions of animals in America and increasingly people. They have now stopped all of the programs in Mexico run by the State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. What do these programs in Mexico do for the State Department's Bureau of International Narcotics Law Enforcement? What do they do? Oh, that's the part of the U.S. government that tries to stop the supply chain for fentanyl coming into this country. All of their actions have been stopped. They've now started firing people at the part of HHS that funds childcare and Head Start. They are firing the people who work at Gettysburg. They are firing the people who work at Shenandoah.
So, guys, look, Donald Trump is screwing the groups that, one, he pretended to care most about, and two, were statistically more likely to vote for him than, let's say, me, right? People like me. And fundamentally, that's, one, just a sign of how sick Trump is, but it's also leading to the fracturing of the MAGA movement. We saw the fractures even before he became president, as Trump dropped all pretense about caring about workers. Remember, where's no tax on tip, guys? Where is that? You know what we are getting? We are getting tax cuts for billionaires. We're definitely going to get that. But no tax cuts for the regular Jane and regular Joe. And here we're seeing the same thing. Remember, Trump said he was going to care about the veterans and the men and women in uniform and all of that. And it seems like he's actually screwing those groups harder than others. And again, I don't want to imply that, for example, if you're from a red state who's going to suffer more because of FEMA going away potentially, or if you're a veteran and you're suffering because Trump is throwing veterans into the unemployment line, I don't want to imply that you're MAGA because you're a veteran or a red state or what have you. But it is kind of ironic, isn't it, that like Trump has these groups where, you know, in a country of 300 million, you could say, if, for example, you're African American, you're more likely to vote Democrat. If you're in law enforcement, you're more likely to be a Republican. Things like that, right? If you're highly educated, more likely to be a Democrat. If you aren't highly educated, more likely to be a Republican, at least now. And what we're seeing here is Trump taking a not a scalpel, because that would imply some level of skill and precision, but taking a wood chipper to every single part of his base except the millionaire and billionaire class. Every other part of his base, the workers, the farmers, the small business owners, the veterans, the armed service people, they are all getting screwed in ways big and small. And you could see Trump supporters begging him to save the people. But Trump isn't listening, because his real base, they are all billionaires.